Good evening. So, I only have a couple of things that I want to talk about today, right? Because I think we're kind of at the stage now, right? And for myself and my own nature, I hate to tell people what to think, right? Or tell people what they should do or shouldn't do, right? Because who am I? But I think there's a certain point where you kind of need to be strongly wording and strongly warning people away from certain types of behavior, certain types of thinking that are just detrimental. And what would you even call them? They're dead on arrival, right? Ideas that are self-detonating, right? They don't produce anything eventually, and they just explode in amongst themselves and destroy any momentum that have been attached to these ideas, right? And it's not so much ideas themselves. It is a cyclopean way of looking at things, right? And we've had like ancient stories of Cyclops. We have it in Greek mythology. We have it in Irish mythology. We have it in Lord of the Rings, right? The eye. We have it on the dollar bill, right? This idea that atop of the pyramid, when you scale to the summit, what is atop that is a singular vision, right? One way of looking at something. And I think in all of these stories, that single eye always has to be overcome. Why? Right? Why? Because it's destructive. It leads to totalitarianism, right? Because eventually you end up with so many people that all adopt the same perspective and the same views that they become so entrenched in that anybody who differs from that becomes an enemy and something that needs to be destroyed, right? And it reacts accordingly. The group or the herd will react accordingly to the difference. So it's important that people don't fall into that trap of becoming hyper fixated on one thing, right? And a good example of that is the Jews, right? There's the idea that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, okay? And what has really bubbled up to the surface lately over the last few years and has been smouldering and gathering a bit of steam in the decades prior to it, right, is the idea that the Jews control every single thing, right? Regardless of what you talk about, someone will throw up the Jews. Fine. Is there an element of that involved in what issues we're seeing in the world? Let's talk about it, right? And let's not just talk about it, but let's give examples, okay? Let's give examples. Let's back up what we're saying instead of just throwing out these sound bites. Or better still, and this is what I would recommend, recognize when somebody becomes so fixated on a singular point that they've got nothing left to offer outside of that point. Because Hannah Arendt, an author and a great thinker, right? And she said, if anti-Semitism is the answer to everything, then it's the answer to nothing, right? And the idea in that is, if you become so dogmatic that all you can see as an answer to any question posed, or any topic discussed, or any problem manifest, right, is this is the thing, this is the true evil, right, then you've got a problem. You've got a problem in your ability to think, and you should recognize that. And I think Irish people, we're not so quick to put people back in their place, right? We're not that quick to do it. We're a little bit too courteous and a little bit too respectful. But when certain patterns of thought become so pervasive that they become corrosive, right? When so many people adopt a singular vision on complex topics and complex ideas that it starts to become destructive, then it needs to be, what would you call it? Shamed, right? It needs to be pointed out for how limiting it is and how destructive it is. Right, so my recommendation here, do what you want, is that if you're seeing someone who's super fixated on one topic, and regardless of what you're talking about, they'll always bring it back to this one solution, this one evil that they've identified, that person's not going anywhere, right? They know maybe a lot about a little, right? But outside of that little sphere, they're useless, right? Because we need to be doing better, and we need to be demanding better of ourselves and of the people that we're hoping to bind with, right, in some way, or align with. We need to be demanding more of ourselves and of each other. And that is a greater ability for entertaining as many thoughts as possible, as many potentials as possible, instead of just landing on one thing that you believe is the cure all and staying there and becoming, I think, so possessed by that idea that anybody who offers something different or offers a yes and, all of a sudden they become a shill, or they become some sort of Zionist spy, or whatever the case is, right? It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. And if you watch it and observe these people, they inevitably become totalitarian, right? So the answer to the totalitarian mess that we're in at the moment becomes this only. And then people galvanize around that idea to such a degree that they become totalitarians themselves. If you don't agree with my diagnosis of what the cause of this totalitarianism is, then I will destroy your reputation, and I will call you names, and I will slander you because you don't think the same way I do, or you haven't arrived at the same solution I have. Ridiculous. These people are worse than the people that are in power now. They're cut from the same cloth, but I think they're worse because they've convinced themselves that they're seeking a solution to a problem, while all they're doing is replicating that very problem in a day-to-day, person-to-person social sphere area, right? That's all they're doing. They have embodied totalitarianism to such a degree that they're unconsciously wielding it and becoming the very thing they've claimed to be fighting against. So if you can't shake someone, or if you can't see someone shake themselves out of that singular perspective, that dogmatic, myopic, monotheistic, right? And put the theology aside. When I say monotheism, I mean they see one thing as the ultimate, and they will slander you if you not even disagree with it, but if you try and supplement what they're saying with some other new information, or maybe it's that and it's this. No, you're trying to take the limelight away from what I've found, right? These people are useless to anything positive. They are, by their very nature, destructive and corrosive elements. They have become, what word did I use? Enraptured, right? They've become spellbound by the very thing that they think is the answer to all the problems in the world, right? And I think we're seeing this in naturally as well, right? Growing pains. We're seeing this in people who are starting to kind of look around and think like, look, this, what's going on here has to stop, has to change. Something has to give in it, right? So people kind of get together with the people in their locality, and then people from different towns might mingle and say, look, we're kind of aimed at the same thing here. Let's all walk together, talk together. But then people get paranoid and suspicious about other people. And some rightly so, right? Because there's always going to be sleepers. There's always going to be people who are trying to hijack movements for their own self-aggrandizement, right? For their own political aims. You're going to have them people all over the place. But I will say this to you. You don't have to trust people to be able to work with them, right? You don't have to trust people to be able to work with them. It's probably best off if you don't trust people, right? Unless they've earned it and continue earning that trust, right? Then it's fine. It's not a matter of trust. It's, I know that person, right? But you don't have to trust someone. And just because you might not trust someone doesn't mean you need to drag them onto an online open forum chat thing where you're just giving out, right? And I was watching this last night and listening to it even, and it was beautiful, right? Because you had a couple of people and they have their differences for whatever reason, And they were arguing about kind of a whole load of nothing, really. Like, I think, to be honest, it's a little bit of territorialism, a little bit of not wanting to look like you're being outdone, right? Or not wanting to look like the effort you've put into assuring the safety of your town or village or whatever is going to be capitalized on by someone who has come in from outside, right? I understand that, but there's a certain part of, like, just putting your ego to the side a little bit, right, and the greater good. And we're not good at that, or we haven't been good at that. Because if we were good at that, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in at the moment, right? We just simply wouldn't be. So we have to own a part of that in ourselves and recognize that we all have it, and find out in what part of my life does that part shine, right? Does that really take over and dictate how I see things, the decisions I make, and the things I say about people or to people, right? But the silver lining of this, and it was a beautiful thing, right? And for myself to listen to it as well, because I've been of the opinion for a long while that one of the greatest weapons we have in this country is the Irish woman. Not all of them. We have some witches in this country. We have some horrible, horrible creatures in this country, right? And we need only look at, I don't know what TV show it was, but I've seen a clip of it. Some Irish breakfast morning television thing, talk show chat thing. And there was a girl on it, and she was talking about abortions, right? And she was talking about them as being miracles, right? And she was tying it back to St. Bridget, and isn't it so funny that St. Bridget, who's adored by the Catholic faith, or the Christian faith, performed the first documented case of abortion in Ireland, right? Whatever the case. But you can see the vacant kind of Prozac eye, right? There's an eye that people have. They get it over time when they've been taking certain pharmaceuticals. And it becomes very, very obvious. It's like a heroin addict, right? Once you see a heroin addict and you know that that's what you're looking at, you will spot that in every single addict that you ever see. You will never miss one again, right? And it's the very same situation with people whose brains have been turned to mush by continued intake of certain antidepressants and certain anti-anxiety medications, right? There's a vacant look that comes over people's eyes, and this girl had it. I don't know her history. That's just my impression of it. But she's talking about abortion, like, and calling it a miracle, like it's some sort of beautiful act, right? And giggling, and just a sense of glee on her face when she's talking about it. That's what I'm talking about. To me, that's a witch, right? Regardless of whether you agree with a woman's having the right or the ability, legally or whatever the case is, to be able to abort a pregnancy, or whether you don't. To deny the seriousness of that situation and to downplay it and minimize it to the point where you see it as something laughable, that's disgusting to me, right? That's disgusting. And that is the act of a witch, right? Modern day witch. But the other side of that coin is we have some ferocious women in Ireland, right? And I'd rather get a bollocking off a man than get peeled by an Irish woman, right? Because they leave no stone unturned, right? And as these lads were going back and forth on this X Spaces last night, talking, disagreeing and a little bit arguing, right? This woman came in, force of nature, I would imagine, in real life, right? And she just straightened the boys out. Like, she's like, what are we doing here? We're arguing. She's like, look, this country needs to get up and going again and standing up for itself, and we need men to do that. But she said, you're all around here like a pack of knickerses, arguing with each other, online, publicly, for everyone to watch and listen and go, these fellas aren't serious, right? And she straightened it out, and I laughed, and I only listened to a few minutes, but it's a beautiful thing to see, right? And we need that, right? We need that. If we become so fixated on these certain topics, You did this, I didn't like it, now I can't trust you. And we just argue about that all the time. Sometimes you do need a stick of dynamite thrown in the middle of you. And it might come in the form of an Irish woman, most likely, right? To just straighten people out a bit, right? So look, take from that what you want. But my point on that is, be very wary. Do what you want, make your own decisions and follow your own gut and your own nature. I would just suggest that you be very, very wary of people whose what they're bringing to the table is oriented around one thing and one thing only, right? And it's a negative thing. It always tends to be against a certain thing, never for something. When you're constantly hedging your bets on just being against a certain thing, there's no staying power to that. Because whether you like it or not, and the immigrant thing is a great one, right? It's a good example of it. Because the anger at the way people are treated by the government and the state, there's elements in Ireland that are trying very, very hard to assure the continuous flow of that anger towards immigrants only, right? Towards immigrants only. So it is incumbent upon yourself to recognize that sleight of hand that's been played and to not fall into that. And to recognize people who only speak in those terms. Because those people are offering you nothing for the future, only an endless revolution, whipping you up emotionally and taking advantage of the fact that you are legitimately angry and trying to tie that to something that is ultimately negative, right? Because you can spend your time being angry at something and hating something and spiraling further and further into that darkness. Or you can kind of divvy up your time into being against something, but also for something, right? And the example of the two men or the three men and the woman, the men ultimately, we're all victims of this at points, right? What they were for in those moments of talking were themselves, right? They were for themselves. They were trying to argue for themselves. And then this woman was saying, look, we need to be against that to a degree. Let's stop being knickerses, as she said, right? Brilliantly put. Perfect. You know, that will straighten you out quickly, being called that, right? Or it should do at least. So yeah, look, be wary of falling into it yourself and be observant enough to recognize that in other people. When they might say great things and have great points, but fundamentally, if it's only aimed at being against something, you can't build on that. It's not positive.